What if the Western world wasn't a collection of countries connected by a common background, but instead a living, breathing force in a constant state of motion and evolution? This is an idea explored in the Percy Jackson books by Rick Riordan. Imagine that the ancient Greek gods are real and have survived over the past 3,000 years in secret, following and residing over the cultural center of the Western world, also known in the series as the Heart of the West. According to the books, the gods are directly tied to this living force, a flame which was first kindled in Greece, converging over Mount Olympus, where the pantheon could watch over the ever-evolving customs, beliefs, and advancements of ancient Greece. This seat of power wasn't built to stay in one place forever. Wherever the flame of the West burned brightest is where the gods would follow. At this point, you might be thinking, where did the gods in the Heart of the West move to after Greece? Probably Rome. But what about after Rome? Let's start from the beginning, in Athens, and follow the flame to every city that could claim the title as the Heart of the West over the last 3 millennia. It's worth mentioning that some people would argue that the roots of Western civilization stretch further back to the ancient civilizations of Mesopotamia, in cities such as Ur, Babylon, or Uruk. I tend to agree with that point of view. The cultural traditions now associated with ancient Greece were inherently influenced by societies born from the Fertile Crescent. Writing, law, agriculture, cornerstones of the Greco-Roman identity, were first developed in the Middle East. With that being said, the people who first conceptualized a distinct Western world placed its origin along the Mediterranean. They found common roots in Greco-Roman history, and later in Judeo-Christian tradition. Because this topic can attract bad faith interpretations, I want to be clear, this essay is not about glorifying the West or promoting any sort of cultural hierarchy. Western history is a story of constant evolution and borrowing, especially from societies outside what we would usually label Western. Anyways, back to Greece. The Golden Age of Athens began following the end of the Greco-Persian Wars in 480 BC. This period is when most of the Western blueprint was written. Even the Persian invasion itself that heralded in this Golden Age mirrors the modern revolutions glorified by Western nations. At the time, the Achaemenid Persian Empire was the real great power in the region. They had the largest military by a mile, and were content to place tyrants on the thrones of the divided Greek and Anatolian city-states. Much like the American colonists and the French peasantry in the late 18th century, the Greek city-states united, rose up, and pushed the overlords from their land. During the war, Athens distinguished itself as a leader. What began as an alliance between cities quickly turned into a de facto empire with Athens at its head. With gold flowing from all across Greece and Ionia, the Athenians built the famed Parthenon, a crown jewel atop the Acropolis, the marble city constructed to honor the glory of the gods. To see the influence of Athens today, you needn't look further than the capitals of most Western nations. The architecture of this age has echoed across time, proving itself timeless. Beyond architecture, Athens was the birthplace of Western philosophy, which is arguably the strongest pillar upon which Western society is built. The moral and ethical framework constructed by these great thinkers are the foundation for constitutions, legal codes, and day-to-day interactions across the Western world. Classical Athens was the blueprint for Western civilization, but in the 4th century BC, the West as we know it wasn't even a concept. The closest idea to the flame of the West was the raging fire of the Hellenistic world, which was about to burn across ancient society like a forest fire through the conquest of Alexander the Great. His Macedonian war machine departed from Greece and spread Hellenic culture to the far reaches of the ancient world, building an empire that would inspire politicians and tyrants alike for thousands of years. Though, as you probably know, Alexander and his empire were short-lived. His death in 323 BC marked the end of the classical Greek period and the beginning of the Hellenistic period. The Macedonian Empire split into a number of successor kingdoms known as diadochi, which were ruled by a number of Alexander's generals. These kingdoms promoted the Hellenic culture far and wide, from the shores of the Mediterranean to the banks of the Indus Valley. It's important to know that this spread worked like a two-way street. The successor kingdoms were influenced equally by the local customs of the areas they ruled, in turn creating new fusions of Hellenic and Eastern traditions that we now broadly call Hellenistic. They also fought relentlessly amongst themselves for half a century in numerous conflicts. The aftermath of these Diadochi Wars established no clear successor to Alexander's mantle, leaving the flame of the West to flicker with no clear seat of power to breathe life back into its flames. That is, of course, until the Eternal City established its supremacy over the Mediterranean. In The Lightning Thief, it explained that the heart of the fire moved to Rome, and so did the gods. Zeus became Jupiter, Poseidon became Neptune, and Hades became Pluto. The gods' metamorphosis represents the motif that culture, power, and identity are transient ideas in a constant state of change. In 270 BC, the once small city ruled by a monarch now existed as a republic, ruling as hegemon over the Italian peninsula. The republic's culture was a combination of Latin and Etruscan, but also contained a strong Greek influence due to the Hellenic standing on the world stage, and more importantly, the close proximity of Greek settlements on the Italian peninsula, known as Magna Graecia. The Romans identified their own deities with the likes of Greece, and over time, assimilated them into one syncretic pantheon. The Romans looked at Zeus, saw a resemblance to their own sky god Jupiter, and said, hey, they are the same. Over time, the mythology of Zeus became the mythology of Jupiter, with slight Latin changes. This process is called religious syncretism, and is a very common practice across history that largely happens naturally. Despite the people's devout worship, the gods did not save the Republic from intense internal strife and endless external conflict. Political disagreements, slave revolts, and wars against the likes of Carthage, Egypt, and the tribes of Gaul cost Rome greatly. After a series of wars, the esteemed general Julius Caesar was declared Dictator Perpetuo, dictator for life. That is until his assassination in 44 BC, which caused another civil war, which was won by his adopted heir Octavian, whose subsequent fight and victory over Mark Antony brought the downfall of Cleopatra's reign over Ptolemaic Egypt, marking the end of the Hellenistic Age. Additionally, Octavian was given the title of Augustus from the Senate in 27 BC, ending the Republic and beginning the Empire. The Roman age ushered in an era of peace known as the Pax Romana, or Roman peace, creating prosperity and heightening the authority of the emperor to a near godlike status. This imperial cult was a critical component of the empire's infrastructure. It convinced the common people that the emperor had a divine right to rule over them. Particularly popular emperors could even be elevated to official godhood through a Senate vote, an idea called apotheosis, which is echoed through ideas like canonization and the reverence of our founding fathers. In order to maintain the illusion that power was still held by the Senate, Octavian preferred to be called princeps instead of Augustus or Caesar. The title originated in the Senate, meaning first person or most eminent, and it's the origin of the titles prince, principal, and president. The amount of symbolic references to the Romans scattered throughout our modern day is astonishing to me, and we are constantly glossing over them in our daily lives because they've become so normalized. The legacy of the Roman Empire is monumental. At its height, its borders stretch from the Atlantic coast of Iberia to the Persian Gulf of the Arabian Sea. The institutions that govern this vast empire are the framework for governments across the Western world. Its dominant culture is integrated into every facet of the modern West. Religion, language, architecture, art, philosophy, literature, and even their food are so synonymous with today's world that we don't often recognize that our society has been running a 2,000-year-old playbook. Over the years, a number of different states, kingdoms, and empires have claimed to be Rome's true successor, when in actuality, the entire Western world is Rome's successor. Eventually, all things must end, even Rome. There were numerous reasons for the empire's split: the realm's size, economic disparity, external invasions, internal civil wars, and a number of despotic emperors with egos larger than the empire itself caused the aging titan to crumble. The empire was permanently split in 395 AD into East and West. The predominantly Greek East was ruled from Constantinople, and the Latin West was ruled from Milan, which had been the seat of Western power since 286 AD. However, The heart of the West still beat from the empire's historic center in the eternal city of Rome. That is until 410 AD, when 40,000 Visigoth invaders sacked the sacred city for the first time in 800 years. Despite the invaders' fury, the fire that laid waste to the city did not overcome the flame of the Western world. At this point, the flame was ingrained in the fabric of societies all across Europe, Africa, and the Middle East. It was bound to be fanned and fed somewhere or another. The transient seat of power traveled on once again, leaving the eternal city it called home for centuries, following the flame to its brightest point, where it found refuge over the city of the world's desire, Constantinople. The fall of the Western Roman Empire and the rise of Byzantium is considered to mark the end of classical antiquity and the start of the Middle Ages. It's worth noting that the Byzantines still considered themselves to be Romans, continuing the legacy of the Roman Empire. Nevertheless, we will still refer to them as Byzantines. In 380 AD, a decree that would gravely upset our symbolic pantheon atop Mount Olympus was announced. Christianity became the official religion of the empire, shedding the polytheistic roots of the past by evolving into a belief system better equipped for the changing times. The cultural output of Byzantium reflects the role Christianity came to hold in the lives of its citizens, and that role was ever present. Art was made primarily to glorify Christ as a means to worship God, primarily in the form of icons, which established religious authority through tangible depictions of previously ambiguous theological characters and ideas. Perhaps the most incredible structure gifted to humanity by the Byzantines is the Hagia Sophia, which was constructed to represent the absolute cosmic order. The architect's intention was to create a vast structure that reflected heavenly order and divine presence here on earth. Lights and shapes within the church are meant to guide the eye upwards towards divine illumination and harmony, essentially guiding patrons of Byzantium towards enlightenment. Enlightened ideas larger than the dome atop the great church arose during the early medieval centuries. As a renewed interest in the Greek philosophers of classical antiquity emerged, the work of Socrates, Homer, and all of the rest were translated and devoured by Byzantine scholars, obsessed with integrating Hellenic philosophy with Christian theology. The Hellenic-Christian synthesis that arose out of this period was instrumental to Christianity's expansion. The classical reasoning of Plato and Stoic teachings of Zeno were used to explain complex Christian ideas, in turn, formulating new revelations and enriching already established traditions. The classical revival was also crucial to the Italian Renaissance, whose proponents could not have developed their humanistic and scientific ideas without the translated texts of the Byzantines. The influence that Byzantium has had on the modern world cannot be overstated. Due to the nature of its geographic home at the crossroads between Europe and Eurasia, the cross-culture symbiosis that took place in Constantinople was the proving ground for the assimilated countries and cultural fusions that developed during the High and Late Middle Ages. While Byzantium preserved the ideas of antiquity, the political and cultural energy of the West was beginning to concentrate elsewhere. The Byzantine Empire lasted until the fall of Constantinople in 1453, but the flame of the West had moved long before, following the city's sack in 1204 during the Fourth Crusade. This idea we're exploring, about wherever the flame burns brightest, is not simply about a civilization surviving. It's about where society is evolving, where new ideas are synthesized with older traditions, and where political and cultural authority is chiefly held. For these reasons, the heart of the West would find itself drawn to the remnants of the Carolingian Empire, a once mighty realm heralded as the successor to Western Rome, but now dispersed into a number of successor kingdoms. The flame ignited in one of Charlemagne's descendant realms, France, fueled by her shining capital, Paris. The heart of the West could have easily made its way back to Italy in time for the Renaissance, but settled over Paris due to what the city represented at the time. While the imperial ways of the past were in decline, the monarchical, state-focused structure of the future was just gaining a foothold in France. By the late 12th century, Paris was already home to one of Europe's first universities. By the 14th century, Paris was the most populous city in Europe, home to an estimated 200,000 people, which was enormous for the time, but still dwarfed by the 1 million inhabitants of 2nd century Rome. The growing size and grandeur of the city began to attract artists and intellectuals from all across the Western world, beginning its reputation as one of the cultural and intellectual hearts of Europe. This reputation was well-deserved, as few cities have exerted as broad an influence across art, education, language, warfare, really just culture in general as Paris. The French have left their mark across every corner of history. To say the flame of the West burnt bright in Paris is putting it lightly. The flame roared, fitting considering Paris's eventual title as the City of Light. Eventually, that flame became too hot to handle, resulting in a series of revolutions that threw not only France into upheaval, but the entirety of the Western world. The French revolutions ignited a fury in the souls of oppressed people all across Europe, Spanish, Italian, and Germans alike, fueled by the ideals of freedom and equality, rose up in an attempt to reform their countries and establish constitutions of their own. Monarchies across the globe were sent into a state of panic as revolutions erupted across the New World. The Spanish colonies of North America fought war after war to gain independence like their American and Haitian neighbors. This era of revolutions was successful for many and catastrophic for others. France itself rose and fell a number of times in the short span of a century, the climax of which was its near-complete domination of Europe under the leadership of the mad genius Napoleon Bonaparte, who used the momentum of rebellion to found his own empire. His domination of Europe was short-lived, but the French Civil Code, drafted under his regime, now known as the Napoleonic Code, is a hugely influential document still referenced to this day. The code outlined the importance of maintaining the secular nature of the state and the government's duty to uphold the defining principles of revolution: life, liberty, and equality before the law. This was the cornerstone of his government and has had a long-lasting influence on many Western legal systems to this day. After Napoleon's defeat at Waterloo in 1815, France entered an era of instability characterized as the long 19th century. France would eventually emerge once again as a major cultural, economic, and political force, but the heart of the West would uproot itself once again and be coaxed across the channel by the coal-fed flame of a new industrial era, where global reach would eclipse continental power in the city of London, the seat that would soon become the center of a global empire. After Waterloo, the British Empire stood largely unchallenged by any other great power. Up until the beginning of World War I, the world saw the British reign as global hegemon. Their unrivaled might was fueled by the Industrial Revolution and supplied by resources taken from their vast colonies all across the world, which were patrolled and protected by a force that would make Poseidon blush. The Royal Navy ruled the waves from the North Atlantic to the South Pacific, protecting key trading routes and acting as the world's first self-appointed policeman. By 1910, with the Great War just around the bend, the British controlled more land and more people than any empire in history. British subjects could be found on nearly every continent. This meant that the flame of Western culture had reached its farthest extent yet, influencing the lives of people all across the globe. Though this flame largely burned more people than it warmed. Throughout history, empires have always left destruction in their wake. Even the Athenians subjugated foreign populations as slaves. While imperial subjugation was not unique, the scale, reach, and global visibility of British rule broadcasted the horrors of empire to the entire world, making its consequences impossible to ignore. Print culture carried by international trade networks and resistance movements highlighted the deep and lasting resentment among those subjugated to Western expansion. The West's poor reputation is largely due to this era of history and the colonial powers of the time. Unfortunately, that reputation would only be reinforced and expanded in the flame's next home. After a series of world wars left the British Empire fragmented and diminished, the flame would make its largest leap yet. As industrial and imperial power gave way to financial and ideological dominance, the heart of the West traveled outside the European continent for the first time, making its way across the Atlantic Ocean to find a new resting spot atop the Empire State Building in New York City. Although the City of Dreams is where the flame now burned brightest, it's worth clarifying that brightness does not equal benevolence, the highest good, or purest justice. Since the end of World War II, the United States has functioned as the center of political, cultural, and economic power in the Western world. To put it simply, we are living in the American age. Movies from Hollywood captivate adults and children alike from Dublin to Hong Kong. Music artists from Atlanta play in the headphones of students in Prague and Sydney alike. Currency from across the globe flows through New York like water down a river, or more aptly, like blood through a heart. And the U.S. Navy has taken the role of self-appointed global policeman to a near omnipresent level. The flame of the West now burns brightest in America, not because it is flawless, but because it is where influence and authority currently converge. As history has shown, the heart of the West does not follow virtue. It follows momentum, innovation, and power. Whether the flame warms or burns depends entirely on how it is carried. Many of you might leave with the belief that the flame is diminished now more than ever. But what seems all-encompassing right now will one day just be a page in a history book, and hopefully it'll be a chapter of redemption, right before the flame erupted in a light that drove back the shadows that haunt civilization. Or perhaps we really are living through the closing chapter of the American age. If there's one thing we've seen across history, it's that the flame of the West has never burned in one place forever. One day, almost assuredly, it will move again. Anyways, that's all for today, folks. I've been your host, Andrew, and I'll see y'all on the next episode of Europa Historia.